word of warning to our viewers again that the story does contain graphic details. Now, the particular dump site where the women's bodies were found, or near where the women's bodies were found, is reportedly visited by a number of people suffering from hunger in that area. Let's take a closer look at the depth of hunger, not only in provinces in South Africa like Limpopo, but in the country as a whole. We're joined now by Operation Hunger's CEO, Sandy Bukula. Thanks very much indeed for coming on to the program. Sandy, there are so many devastating parts to the story, the way in which these women were murdered, the way in which their bodies were dumped, so many devastating parts to it. But let's hone in on the issue of hunger in Limpopo. Now, I've got a report here in front of me that tells us that 49% of South Africans will go to bed hungry by 2025. And ironically, the site where this horrific story has unfolded, the province, Limpopo, is going to be or will suffer the worst food insecurity also by 2025, Sandy.
Hi, Michelle, and thank you for having me and having me on. Just to basically reiterate to what you have just spoken about. So if we're looking at the context of Limpopo alone, I mean, the multi-poverty dimension for Limpopo's province for the households, it's sitting at 11.8%, which is basically the highest of all years. And if you also just looking at who the most people that are affected are, female-headed household by 47.6%. So that gives you almost like the context in terms of what does household food security looks like within the population and the dynamics of Limpopo. But it also shows you the scope with which how it actually compares to other provinces as well. Now, we know that Eastern Cape and Limpopo have been consistently been the highest in the multi-dimension poverty index. It has also been very highest within food insecurity, and also it has been very high in terms of the number of people that are living below the poverty line, which is about 840 rand per month. So that gives us a little bit of a scope. And we think about basically in terms of availability and access. I mean, the most amount of the people that live within the Limpopo region basically depend mostly on social grants to be able to provide for families. And it doesn't help that the previous economic turbulence that has been showing within the country itself, but also on the province, where we've seen quite a lot of decrease in terms of, of economic activity in terms of exports and imports. It has obviously left in another number of people that were employed to be basically unemployed. So, it is basically just married with a number of food insecurity trends as well as malnutrition trends.
So when our reporter was talking to some church representatives there in Limpopo, one of the questions she asked was, who needs to be addressing this? And the answer she received in large part was that this is a government priority. It should be a government priority, Sandy. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree that it's a government responsibility, especially from a policy point of view, because I think we have been very slow in terms of the progress. And I think also just coming out of the COVID-19, because the COVID-19, what it really did for us, it highlighted the gaps within our food systems across the country, as well as emerging markets that could be explored. But not only that, I think basically the issue of nutrition and nutrition care is not only just a government, the government is definitely an actor, but it's actually a responsibility for all sectors. And I think basically getting the economy into, getting the economy to start being more productive and absorbing more people in, it would have quite a huge impact. And not only looking at that, because I mean, if you're looking at the economy and where the budget necessarily that has been looking at food insecurity and, food insecurity and basically just hunger and livelihoods, it has been coming a lot from the social grant, but in a form of relief. And we haven't done really much in terms of how nutrition and malnutrition actually impacts livelihoods, and looked at other coping mechanisms and actually collaborate, those different touch points in different sectors. I'll give you just a simple example. In Limpopo, we've got about 43 projects, and all 43 projects are basically in an integration to self-sustainability. But what our biggest problem is that when we are ready to basically move, our beneficiaries from relief programs and integrate them to start developmental programs where they can start self-sustainable projects and putting in agriculture as the food as a food system coping strategy. What we normally battle with is infrastructure in that region, and also like water and sanitation is a huge problem. Right, so right. Even if we're looking at bringing in such a huge influx, of agri, of agri other related sectors, the problem is the infrastructure. So yes, the government is not doing enough, and I think basically what we need to start to look at is in all the different sectors, and when we're looking at the budget, where do we actually take out the certain touch points where we can actually link to sparing protection services and livelihoods for people? Because I think if we're only just looking at infrastructure and we're thinking about putting infrastructure, bringing in economy, how do we absorb like the livelihoods of people and ensuring that people are actually optimized and they are remediated from the stages that they are in?
So Sandy, when we talk about, and I want to get to the issue of food scarcity, the 49% of people in South Africa who will be living under food scarcity conditions. Stunting for children is also another issue as we build to the future. But I want to ask you this. Let's discuss the issues around people living off of food that they find that is dumped. Now there are various feeding schemes around the country that are able to utilize food that perhaps is nearing their expiration date from the big grocery chains, right? And they use that and they're able to put that food to good use. But food that is dumped, Sandy, how do we gauge, the cleanliness of that food, whether meat has gone off and you're taking that home and you're eating it because you don't have any other option?
I really love that question because what you're talking about is a huge issue around food rescue, and ourselves as well. We have basically services that try to rescue food from, like your big retail stores, your hotels, so that we can be able to reach, like the homes of people that are in destitute. However, the dumping sites, it poses such a big risk because if you think about the scientific laws in terms of food safety, food that is already, it has to be sold by date, at least it needs to be stored in a perfect condition and it can be eaten between 7 to 10 days. But if it's over that and it has been in such an open environment, now you have to think about things like E. coli, cholera, especially within the rubbish bin. So, that obviously impacts a lot in terms of other non-communicable diseases, which can actually result in death in some instances. So I think basically what really would work, especially within rural communities like Limpopo, which we've already established, is obscuring the foods obscuring the produce that is not of use or that would otherwise go as excess from the farms, but to reach the number of people, because the number of people grows so much. And the reach, to infiltrate, it needs a multiple number of actors, because also the limitation in terms of funding and logistics of basically galvanizing and organizing all of that and reaching the needed beneficiaries is quite a big of a problem. What we've done with Operation Hunger so far is we have actually included, we included like a provincial profiling where on the areas where we are active and the areas that are closer to the areas that we are active, we can be able to see the trends and we are able to track the trends and the the determinants that are closer so that we can be able to reach the people closely. So we've been basically putting sort of provincial hotspots so that we can be able to reach people, within at least days or within weeks. Within a week, at a time of destitute. But our financing levels are not able to provide for the large majority of the need that is currently in, which we are doing something about it, because we've obviously implemented innovative ways with which we can be able to receive funding, and we are looking at international funding as well. But you have to remember, we have like a national footprint, so we're not able to reach more. But what we do is we do collaborate with smaller NPOs within those specific areas that we are not operational on, so that we can at least be able to reach those homes that are in destitute.
Well, it's absolutely imperative that we reach these homes, right? A logistical nightmare or not. And it brings me back to the issue of stunting. 21% of children will be stunted by 2025, and that's next year. 2025 is no longer some far-off target in the near to far future. What does that mean for our workforce in the future, for our children, and for the possibilities that are open to them as a result of stunting?
I mean, you've just mentioned the one problem, which is stunting, which is sitting at 21%, but we also have got issues like wasting as well, which has increased from 7.5 to about 10% over the last 5 years. And this really impacts on the, on the ability for education, because it impacts really on the children within their cognitive ability, as well as their development, as well as their physical development. And what normally happens is that most of the kids that are affected by stunting don't finish. So the enrollment is so high in the beginning years, and then but you don't, like the ending of the graduation for the secondary level is not so high. So people are dropping out as well, and that actually increases the number of crime also, because those people, those people basically fall off from the formal educational structure, and they have to find ways with which that they can be productive. And of course, crime elements fall force. Like an increase also basically in terms of susceptible to diseases, which also basically puts a huge burden on the health budget, because how we've been very much reactive has been only within within the treatment of the diseases, but we haven't actually put much more in terms of the prevention methods. And I think, Sandy, for example,
I'm so sorry to cut you off there, but I think your point is absolutely well made. We are running out of time for this segment, but thank you very much indeed for giving us that perspective on not only the picture in Limpopo, but nationally as well. Sandy Bukula is the CEO of Operation Hunger, and of course our hook for that story is that horrific story that unfolded in Limpopo, the bodies of 2 women who were found dumped at a pigsty at a Limpopo farm, apparently after they'd been shot when they were looking for food.